So now, just to get back to the reason why we're all gathered here this evening, we have a great panel planned for this evening on the topic of public-private partnerships, and we're excited to feature several of our alumni experts for this conversation. Mike Burns, Walter Eggers, Matt Girard, and Dave Zanetell. We'll hear introductions from each of them shortly. And I'd also like to mention that the idea for this panel came out of a discussion at the Construction Engineering and Management Advisory Board, of which our panelists and their companies have had involvement with over the years. We truly appreciate their support of the college, and we look forward to learning from them this evening. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our panel moderator, Mike Burns, for introductions.
Great, thank you, Erin, and thank you everybody for joining. Really excited to have this conversation today. A few more thank yous as well. Keith Molinar and Matt Morris for entertaining this idea, as Erin just alluded to. Kevin Lobdell and Aaron for supporting this session. They did a great job keeping us on task and getting us here to have this conversation with you today. I also want to thank my teammates at Vanner, where I work, for supporting these type of continuing education efforts. Vanner is the largest woman minority owned program, project, and construction management firm in the US. And our primary business is serving public agencies across the social and civil infrastructure sectors as they convert their policy objectives into projects that serve our communities. And throughout my career, I've had the opportunity to work across the design, build, finance, and operate continuum, both domestically and internationally. And in doing so, I've found the rich history and the demand for public-private partnering to be a really interesting environment. It's a particularly interesting environment when you look at the demands today on the AEC industry as we move more and more from implementing complicated projects, all the things that we do as architects, engineers, and contractors, to investing in complex, sustainable solutions. As the son of two Boulder educators, I'm really excited to be part of this University of Colorado event. I grew up in the shadow of this amazing institution. I have so many rich memories as a kid running around on campus, and ultimately, that led me to completing my master's in construction engineering and management in 1996. So we appreciate you being here today. Happy to have the conversation, and also willing to connect outside of this environment as questions arise or you want to have deeper conversations as we support each other's careers and help progress solutions for our communities. Before I turn it over to our esteemed panel to introduce themselves, Walter Eggers from Kiewit, Matt Girard from Plenary Americas, and Dave Zanetell from Kramer North America, I want to take a moment to acknowledge Kiewit's support of the College of Engineering and Applied Science through the Kiewit Design Build program, which supports up to 40 students with scholarships each year. And with that, I'll turn it over to Walter Eggers for Kiewit for his introduction.
All right, thank you. So I earned my undergraduate degree in civil engineering in 1984, and when I graduated, Kurt Gerstel asked me if I would consider going to graduate school. And I told him I'd love to, but there was no way. I was broke and needed to go earn some money. And then he said, well, what if I pay for it? So I went to graduate school and worked on his NSF grant. And in my graduate studies, I focused on finite elements, computational mechanics, and dynamics. And I really decided to try to learn all the things that I would be unlikely to be exposed to outside of a university environment. I figured I could learn concrete design on the job, which ended up being a great decision. And after I worked in Denver for a couple of years post-graduation, I had the opportunity to move back to San Diego to work with Jean Mueller designing segmental bridges. And at JMI, we always worked for contractors. And though I didn't know it at the time, all of those projects were part of what we would now call alternate delivery models. And in 2010, I joined Kiewit, where I've been applying all those lessons I've learned directly to our construction projects.
Great. Matt?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So I have both a bachelor's and master's in civil from CU a few years ago now. I have spent my entire 30+ year career in the construction industry, but also the far majority of it in the alternate delivery side of that business as well. I've worn a couple hats in that alternate delivery industry. First and foremost, I kind of grew up in the construction side, working for heavy civil contractors. So over 20 years at Flatiron. grew up in that world of, estimating and project management and moving around, building that stuff. Also a short stint at AECOM on the consulting side of the business, and now 8 years at Plenary, a developer in that same industry. So once again, worn multiple hats in that industry, but have loved the alternate delivery side of it really my entire career.
Thanks, Matt. Dave.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dave Zanetell. Similar journey. I graduated from the School of Mines, worked for about 6 or 7 years, and then went back to school for graduate school at CU and working with Professor Diekman. And it was a life-changing experience for me, and certainly a career-changing experience. I feel like I came in with a good toolkit, and there I gained all of that insight in what was right at the forefront of alternate delivery, of delivery systems, construction management, project controls, all of the tools that was lucky enough to then get to apply after I left. I worked about 25 years for the Federal Lands Unit of Federal Highways, which is a really delivery-oriented for-fee entity. Worked on great projects all throughout the Western U.S. Got to work on projects and in organizational strategies, how to implement alternate delivery, be a pioneer in some of those methods. Why do you select those things that are commonplace now? Have spent about the last 10 years, I felt like at some point, 25 years in, I felt like I could be a better contractor than some of the contractors I saw. And so I thought I'd try it. So I've spent about the last 10 years as president of Kramer North America, focused on a good blend of hard delivery, technical, challenging projects, and alternate delivery. And really feel blessed from all of those successes circle right straight back to my experience at CU.
Thanks, Dave. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and provide a brief introduction to public-private partnering, or as we call it, P3. I don't think that worked. So you should be able to see my screen now. I do want to thank the AIAI, Association for the Improvement of American Infrastructure, for this presentation. That's a great industry association, very inviting. If you have interest in this topic, certainly they're willing to talk to you and allow you to participate in their events and conferences. Obviously, I always want to start with the what. A P3 is a contractual agreement between a public agency and a private entity that allows for greater private sector participation in the delivery, finance, and operation of a project. For all of you in the architectural engineering and construction space, you have some sense of the delivery methods from traditional design, bid, build, which is still relevant for a lot of projects, but in some instances creates challenges where we find out that we get into the build environment or even the bid environment and don't have the right price, don't have the right schedule, and can't meet our obligations, all the way over to the right side of the continuum, which is privatization, which also creates challenges where we've given a private entity the opportunity to develop and operate a public asset that may no longer have connectivity to the public expectations. And everything in the middle there is really, as Walter, Matt, and Dave spoke to, the alternative delivery continuum. And it's in that space, where P3 can really be successful as we bring the right minds early into a project to meet the asset expectations. But it's important to note, as you look at P3, what it is and what it isn't. P3 is a design, construction, finance, operation, and maintenance partnership. So the public sector and a variety of private sector entities come together to come up with the right solution, or as we'll talk about in a moment with our panel, the best mousetrap to deliver and maintain an asset. Therefore, it's a life cycle procurement approach. It makes sure that we consider the operating demands of the asset throughout the programming and design aspects of the project. At the heart of it is risk sharing. It's not risk flow down, it's risk sharing, making sure the right entity takes the risk to come up with the solutions to deliver, maintain the asset. And therefore, the relationships in a P3 must be transparent so that the public sector understands our policy objectives are being met, and each of the entities who are delivering, designing, and then ultimately constructing and maintaining are, one, meeting their profit expectations, but doing so the asset that meets the public sector's expectations. As importantly as what a P3 is what a P3 is not. It is not privatization. It is not simply handing over the public sector's role to a private entity and hoping that it functions. The public sector stays actively involved in this delivery method. It's not a funding solution. We're not creating new money, though in some instances we can certainly get better fiscal impact from the money. And in other instances with the private sector investment, we can expand our capacity to deliver an asset, but it is not new money. It certainly isn't a short-term contract, which is where we see the traditional design, bid, build, live. These are very complicated long-term contracts with a variety of entities. And therefore, it's not the solution for every project. They're very complicated. They have to have the right team to be successful. And that's what our panel is going to discuss today. Again, AIAI is an interesting group to be a part of. They have conferences, and we certainly suggest that if this is something that interests you through one of our panel members or the notations on this slide, that you get involved and learn more about it and inform the next steps for public-private partnerships in North America. So now we want to turn to our panel and work through a panel discussion. And we get to a little bit past a half hour. We'll also look at some of the questions that you're asking. And I will do my best to track those questions here on Zoom and make sure that we can respond to them if we have time. First, I want to look to Matt, again, from Plenary. And Matt, when your team evaluates an investment opportunity, how do you make the choices of what are the right projects for Plenary?
Yeah, my 20+ year career as a contractor is going to come out in these answers, even though I now work for a developer, but I think they still hold true. Basically, I would put our decision to invest in a job or not, or really to pursue a job or not, really into three buckets, similar as a contractor would, right? P3s cost a lot of money to pursue, just like a design build project does. So you want the project to be real. In other words, you don't want to go through a procurement to have the project canceled, right? You spend all this money, you take your A team and you put strong resources on it, and you lose some opportunity if that project then gets canceled. And P3s tend, I mean, let's face reality here. P3s tend to get canceled a little more frequently than standard, smaller size or more standard hard bid or even design build projects, right? Sometimes we say P3 is really a P4 because it's really a public-private partnership with a whole bunch of political risk, right? They're higher profile, right? And sometimes they have tolls. They're longer term contracts. It's a new contracting method, so they tend to get canceled a little more frequently. And so when we look at it, before we decide to pursue a job, we got to know it's real, and that tends to be on critical infrastructure that an owner simply has to have. And they will proceed with it, and they will see it through to the end. So that's really the first point. The second point, from an investor standpoint, once again from a design builder standpoint, even is the project has to be financially feasible, right? I mean, a design builder isn't going to chase a $600 million project if they know the owner only has $400 million. So similarly, on a P3 side, if the payment mechanism to us to recoup our investment is an availability payment, we have to know the owner has enough in their budget over the long term to pay that value back. If the project is more of a revenue risk-based kind of P3, in other words, toll risk revenue, let's say, we have to know there's enough traffic on that road with reasonable toll rates that we can get paid that back. If not, it's simply not a financially feasible project. That's not even going to get to financial close, right? And finally, I'd say team strength. If you can put together a strong team from all aspects, right? Strong designer, strong builder, strong finance entity, strong O&M entity, then you give yourself a fighting chance. And if you don't have all strong partners in all of those aspects, once again, you're going to be spending a lot of money to pursue a project that your odds of getting aren't that high, right? You wouldn't, as a design build contractor, you wouldn't pursue a design build project just for practice, or if you don't have a strong team, because once again, you're going to spend a lot of money and not win a project. So those are the kind of the three buckets I'd put it into, Mike.
All right, thanks, Matt. You spoke to a couple of interesting topics. One was the political risk, which certainly affects the procurement phase and the dollars that are expended to just win the project, and also how critical it is to have the right team. So I want to turn to Dave. And Dave, as developers, we call them concessionaires, identify the right opportunities. They form special purpose vehicles, which is where the public entity engages to kick off a consortium to deliver. But really, from my perspective, at the heart of that is the design build joint venture. And if you could describe to us how a contractor drives the design, budget, and schedule through the procurement phase to create, as Matt noted, the right team to win that procurement, we greatly appreciate it. Thanks.
Sure. I'd want to offer up, the P3 is not an everyday thing, and that's a journey for most contractors, and we're one of those. So we've got experience on some that are going well and quite a few that we say no to. And I think I'll build on Matt's theme first on, Matt talked about real, feasible, and team strength. The first thing is we have to kind of assess, how are we going to fit in this team? We're, as a contractor, we're approached with kind of two distinct contrasts at times. It can be, hey, you're going to be on this team, or we're inviting you to be on this team as a straight contractor. And really, you may not be really in the inner circle of where that's going or whatnot. And those are opportunities I'll take a rain check on. But that is a role that frequently kind of evolves. The keys are to understand what role do you envision for the contractor, how engaged or not in the overall umbrella of the exercise. As a contractor, you're usually there because you're regionally or locally relevant to that atmosphere, can be highly competitive. So you have to make sure you understand, how's this going to fit within the context of the rest of our business? If one of the other prospective teammates, for example, is a direct competitor, you may not want to be propping them up, sitting in meetings talking about how great they are when you know you're going to be competing against them for the next 10 years. So there's a lot of kind of filtering to get down to the right team. And I would say, Mike, once you go through those filters, you then already know you're on a team that you are going to be a member of the team. And in doing that, then your opportunity to collaborate on design, early schedule, understanding what that developer sees as the win strategy, bringing forward, well, hey, we're in that market. This is something that we think, that second tier owner is going to find very important. You get to bring that all together, and it's pretty healthy. So I would just advise to the group, I'd say it's probably easier to say no than to say yes. And if you're on your way to saying yes, do your homework to make sure it's the endeavor that makes the right sense.
Thanks, Dave. Matt and Dave have both spoken about the risk profile associated of going after one of these types of procurements and the reality of having the right team. And of course, the team's got this design build joint venture, at the heart of which they've got to compete with other consortiums to come up with the best design, the best mousetrap, as we often say. And unlike some procurements, it's the Capex and the Opex that have to be considered to win and ultimately have the opportunity to deliver and be profitable in this space. So Walter, I want to turn to you and understand the dynamic and the pace and what are the skills required from a design team to make sure you have that winning design responsive to the Capex and Opex demands during the procurement phase.
And I think for a designer, the real difference between a P3 and all the other alternate delivery models for that matter is that they've really made engineering valuable again. for so many years, all of the public sector designs were standardized. You couldn't really gain an edge by having a better design because everybody was bidding the same thing. There wasn't much room for innovation. And in fact, if you did innovate, it was a pretty risky business. If you did a value engineering change proposal, for example, all of a sudden you found yourself taking responsibility for the design, and whatever money you paid for engineering was going to take away from the additional profit that you hoped to get by chasing the innovation. But in the alternate delivery world, clever engineering wins the project. And when we go to look at a project as Kiewit, one of the things that we look at is there something in the design where we think we can get an edge? Can we use our engineering to reduce the cost and make us more competitive? And if we don't think we can, we might not bid it. But in order to do that, you have to put together a team that can really, address all of the aspects of the pursuit, the design, the means and methods, financing, all of that. And what that really means is you have to find a really large group of talented people quickly and put them together in a team and have them working together, even at the proposal stage. And the staff that you need are not always in the same place. You have to decide how you're going to get them to communicate on a very intense level, create an environment where they can collaborate. And are you going to do that by co-locating them, or can you do it remotely? And how are you going to get them to really function together? And the other thing that, of course, you have to do in a P3 is you have to bring in all of your builders and financiers too. You have to know where the money is. The designer can't make a job cheaper on his own. He has to know what's expensive and what's not. Saving time may be more important than reducing materials. On Ram Stadium, which we worked on last year, we were able to take about a year and a half out of the schedule and save $100 million. But I think the changes that we made resulted in buying more materials, not less. But the efficiency and labor, the reduced labor involved with installing those materials is what resulted in the savings. So you have to know what about the design makes it better. And then in terms of the skills required, I've always said farm boys make the best engineers, and I strongly believe that. When you're out on a farm, you can't call someone to come fix things on your schedule. You have to learn to solve the problems yourself. And in engineering, we talk a lot about tools and technology, and certainly those things are important. But the mindset to solve problems is by far the most important asset, because there are lots of problems.
Yeah. Great, thanks, Walter. And you brought up a really interesting concept of the alternative technical solution, the ATS, and the fact that P3 allows those to be proposed, which means that design has more value. But with each one of those alternative technical solutions on these large, complex projects, we've got to make sure that the means and methods, the schedule, and the cost are considered. So Dave, can you describe for our audience what that dynamics like during the procurement phase between the contractor and the designer, and how you collaborate to ultimately evaluate those solutions and propose them?
Yeah, I think that's the place where the good stuff happens. That's where the adrenaline happens, and really, truly, no matter who it is, it's everybody sitting around the room, and it starts with brainstorming, ideas on how do we achieve the owner's goals, right? It starts with what are those goals? If this is a get from point A to point B, cheapest way possible, then that's the goals, right? If it's to achieve other goals, then you have to understand those goals and then come into the room, and really the designer and the contractor collaborate. And the designer may bring technical ideas, here's an alternate way, and the contractor brings, well, you know what, access is going to be hard on that. We'll look at that from a pricing perspective, from a different alternative. And between the two, before you know it, good ideas just start to build on other good ideas, and a lot of frank discussion about, does this achieve the goal? Is this worth the investment versus the goal matrix? So it's truly a team approach. There's no successful project that's delivered, either won or delivered, that doesn't ultimately have a team approach to it. If there's two camps, or ultimately 3 camps with the owners, there is not going to be success in delivery. It's got to be a team during procurement and a team during execution, would be my takeaway here.
Yeah, we hear that a lot in the alternative delivery space. It truly is about collaboration. It truly is about all the minds finding the right solution. And when you think about that, Walter, I'm interested in how has that changed your business model? How has it affected your organization? How does it affect how you invest in personnel, particularly, your entry level folks as you grow them to make sure that they're ready to perform in that, what sounds like a very dynamic and challenging environment?
Yeah, well, Kiewit has completely changed its organization in response to these delivery models. About a decade ago, they realized that in order to be successful, they were going to have a better understanding of the engineering services that they were buying. And so made the decision to start hiring design engineers. And we're, sort of steadily increasing that capacity for a few years. They followed up by adding some engineering quality folks and some design managers. And then, as you know, finally a finance group. But about 3 years ago, they just jumped in whole hog and completely decided to take over all of the engineering and manage it themselves. Not to say we don't still buy a lot of engineering services from consultants, but we are slowly moving to the position where we're going to try to manage all of our designs and our projects ourselves. And so we've created a new group, a new district called Kiewit Infrastructure Engineers. It's about 800 people now. It includes design engineers in all disciplines, from everything from bridge design to computational fluid dynamics. We have design managers and proposal writers, and really the whole gamut. And really importantly, when we hire young people, we look for people that have some sort of practical background in addition to a great university education, so that they can rotate through some of our different activities. They can be on site for a year working with the builders. Maybe they go to the temporary works group for a while and help with false work design, might get involved with the business development or the finance side and help out on that a little bit. And I think that's true with all of our people. We're trying to let everybody walk in each other's shoes a bit, so that we all understand what the other's perspectives are. The builders have come to town and they're in the same building with our designers. We brought a lot of senior people from our operations districts to come work with the designers, so that they all understand the other's problems. We still have builders that for the life of them can't understand why it takes so long to put a few lines on a piece of paper. And we have designers that have no idea how much it really costs when they're a month late. So I think really it's echoing a lot of what Dave said. We're really trying to force the issue and bring people together and find people with the right skills and the right background to be able to grow into a position where they can really be a part of the whole process.
Yeah. Matt, as I listen to Walter and the reality of Kiewit's continued investment in this space, you as the concessionaire, the developer who has to build a team, we've also in the past 5 years seen a number of companies step out of the P3 space because of the investment, because of the risk associated. So how do you evaluate your team? How do you pick the right partners, back to the political risk profile you started us off with on 1, picking the right project, 2, picking the right team? How do you go through that analysis?
Yeah, great question, because it is so important. You put a bad team together or the wrong person on a pursuit, and it's probably not going to go well. I come back to design build, right? I mean, I've been doing design build for almost my entire career, right? And they're challenging, right? As Dave and Walter said, you've got designer mentalities and you've got contractor mentality, and you got to make sure they work together well. Cats and dogs in the same sandbox, making sure they're pulling in the same direction, and that can be hard, right? You've got every innovation that Walter's talking about. You've got a design consideration and a construction consideration. So you've got 2 very big variables playing back and forth. And that can be challenging for a lot of players in both design shops and contractor shops, right? I came to the conclusion long ago that it's simply not for everyone within that contractor shop, it's not for everyone. You need to have your A players who understand, as Walter was saying, that understand the other side, that can play well in that sandbox and push both sides to work well together, right? And so it can be very challenging to put the right people on design build projects, right? And at the end, you end up with a project pursuit that was more challenging and a project that you have to go build, as Dave said earlier, now with probably some higher risk. And so now you relate that to a P3. I kind of call it a design build on steroids, right? Because now you don't just have two variables, designer variables and construction variables. Now you kind of have four, right? You have an O&M cost variable, you have a cost of finance variable. And so now every innovation you come up with, every decision you make now has to come back to all four of those variables, and you have to figure it into a life cycle analysis, right? You might have a more expensive upfront cost, but it lowers, the O&M costs long term, right? That could be challenging for a lot of contractors, right? Because me included, how is every engineer raised within the contractor mentality, right? Low cost, low cost, low cost. And now they've actually got to step back a minute and say, well, maybe there's a good idea here where a higher cost up front brings a lower life cycle cost. So it's a completely different mindset. Like I said, it's kind of like the DB on steroids. So now you don't just need the A team, you kind of need the A plus team, because now those pursuit challenges and those pursuit costs potentially, as well as the risk that you might have at the end of the day, are probably going to be higher for everybody, right? And so you better really have the people that play well in that environment, that understand that four variable life cycle environment better than the other people in your shop, but also better than the competition, right? Because you got to come up with that better mousetrap.
Right, great. Really enjoyed that panel conversation. Obviously an incredibly challenging, but very interesting place for us to participate. I want to respond to a few of the questions that came in from the audience. And in about 5 minutes, then we're going to break out into rooms where you'll have an opportunity to, either with myself, Matt, Walter, or Dave, talk about the advisory role, the developer role, the designer role, or the contractor role. And Aaron's going to break us out in a moment. But one of the questions that came in was sort of broadly asking about what type and how much utilization is there of alternative delivery. And I want to twist that a little bit into the current dynamic we're seeing politically with the federal conversations about infrastructure investment, which are very focused on improving infrastructure that's been underinvested in for a very long time, but trying to get more with our dollars we do it, and make sure that we consider those long-term investments and the life cycle cost and everything that's been mentioned here. But in the P3 space, it's kind of created an interesting continuum. And if there's all this money, how do we make sure we continue to be creative and get the right mousetrap? So I just want to go around to each one of you and quickly get your sense of, if the infrastructure bill gets through Congress, where do you see it impacting your markets the most? And maybe it's an unfair question, but I think it'll be interesting for our audience to get your political perspective. So Walter, I'm going to start with you and kind of get a perspective on where Keywood thinks these infrastructure expenditures will take us, and in what sectors.
Well, I don't really know across all sectors. I know transportation, I'm sorry to say, but we're looking at a lot of new bridge projects, roads, tunnels, all of those things, and especially a lot of transit, and are really hiring and gearing up to do some of that work. And we hope that it plays out, and that's where a lot of the money is spent, because it's definitely needed there.
And expecting more of those to be alternative delivery with a subset of P3 in that space. Yeah,
we probably do 70%, 75% of our dollar volume in alternate delivery. That's not to say that most of the jobs are alternate delivery. Probably by far and away, most of the jobs are not, but the big jobs, of course, are all alternate delivery.
Right. And Matt, you did a great presentation recently to the CU Advisory Board on where the political moment might take us. Where does Plenary see this going, and what opportunities or possibly constraints is it creating for your business model?
Yeah, we're all pulling out the crystal ball here, right, a little bit, and hopefully by the end of summer there's something that crystallizes, and we all know where it's headed. Obviously, with it so many questions out there, it's really hard to say and hard to plan, right? But I agree with Walter in that there's probably a lot of dollars that'll be coming for transit and in different green energies, electric charging stations, bridge repairs. most likely the federal legislation will be, somewhat silent on P3s. In other words, it's not going to push them. It's not going to say you can't do them, right? So I think what happens with a lot of dollars flowing is that you've got a lot of, say, state DOTs that are behind, right? And they want to do these big projects, right? And they may not have the capacity to do them the old-fashioned way, whether you bundle them like Pennsylvania bridges, or whether you just do large-scale projects. The larger scale projects lend themselves a little bit more to P3. So I think a lot of owners will potentially get dollars that float them and say, look, I've got a lot of these dollars or future dollars, and I may want to parlay them into doing a P3 to kind of play in that catch-up mode. So I think states that have done P3s will probably do more, and states that haven't done P3s probably won't do P3s. So I think it's kind of a mixed bag of what we'll end up seeing. But when you add dollars to the industry, I don't think it can ever be a bad thing necessarily in terms of putting more work out there.
Great. Thanks, Matt. And before I turn to the one question that came in from the chat, I want to make sure we get this plug into our audience that, all of this exciting conversation about infrastructure is another great opportunity to get our best and brightest minds to go into this industry, to go into architecture and engineering construction, because these really are fun, challenging projects to deliver, and they do mean a lot to our communities. But we did have a question come in from William. In a P3, how far along, kind of 0 to 100% continuum, does the AE design need to be developed for the P3 team to have a reliable total cost site model? So I'll look to whoever would like to answer that. And during the procurement phase, we use like the 30%, but what's the reality of that? Where do you really get confidence from the design process that what the total Opex and Capex will be?
Really depends on where the project's risks are. Some projects may not have a lot of design risk, so you wouldn't need to spend a whole lot of time getting a very detailed design. One of the examples that I love to give is on a suspension bridge. The suspension cable is a very expensive part of the bridge, but everybody knows what it is, so you don't spend much time designing it. The foundations they're expensive too, of course, but that's where the risk is, so you spend more time figuring that out. So I think it's all about responding to the risk of a project.
I love that we're gonna go into our breakout rooms with the word risk. I spent 6 years in a global role doing risk management, and the one thing that I always preached to our teams was a risk workshop isn't something that goes on the shelf. And what I just heard from you, Walter, is that the risk analysis is something that you live, and the risk analysis is what drives how you invest and what drives when you have confidence that you've got the right solution. So.
It's always better if you live the risk analysis before you build it.
Well said. So again, Aaron, I think we've had a great conversation. I really have enjoyed spending time with this panel, and we'll turn it over to you to get into the breakout sessions and have some additional chat with our fellow CU alums.